Right, so hello, welcome back to the Philosophy Club in here in sleepy Batet in the middle of ancient France. We're celebrating Imbolc here. It's the Druid kind of first signs of spring, and it's getting slightly warmer, the light is coming back and flowers are beginning to peak from the undergrowth. There's a beautiful feeling in the air. So that's, we want to celebrate tonight, really. Yesterday we had a lovely music club to celebrate Imbolc with some live poetry and music and songs improvised, from the ethers. So that was a lovely event last night. And so just to recap, what's been going on this week, like I always do. Well, the arts loom large at the current time, not just because we had the music club last night, but we also had a visit. One of the people playing a part in the music club was Elise Byram, who's writer-in-residence at the moment in La Creuse, and she's written a couple of novels, kind of sci-fi type things, and she came on a tour of the museum and then came to the music club, so that was very exciting. And we've been talking about literature and the role of writing and poetry in creating a more peaceful world, and what is the role of sort of future, novels that predict the future. I mean, I've written one of these, which I think, I'm having met Elise, I'm more determined than ever to get translated into French and brought out by a really good publisher, because it charts the future history of humanity in a positive way. This week I also took part in a talk I gave to the university at George Mason University in Washington, D.C., where there's a long tradition of peace studies, conflict analysis and so on, set up by my late colleague John Burton, and it's a hub of this kind of field of knowledge. My friend, the sociologist Lester Kurtz, invited me to give a talk to his students, and I chose to work on the 99 Names of Peace, my new book of that title, and that went, I think, hopefully well. I've also been meeting with my friend Satchen Raja this week, who is running the Warrior Sage, teams, and he's actually in Hawaii at the moment and about to fly later to India to go on a pilgrimage tour with a group of students, and he's going to the Kumbh Mela, this great gathering of millions of people. He is himself from a lineage of ancient Indian provenance, although he was born in Uganda. His ancestors go back to that epoch, and in their family they have a tradition. He goes back to the tribal groups associated with Rama. So we're planning a course on the warrior sage and how to become a peace warrior. So I think we're going to be planning this for next year, an online course because I think we need peace warriors at the moment in the world. The world is is full of too many actual warriors killing each other, being misled by false leaders. I've been watching in horror as a Canadian Trump's saber rattling against Canada. I mean, the guy has completely lost the plot. I did say to a friend of mine, like, if Trump was actually a Russian asset and doing everything he can to destabilize the US and crash its economy and mess with relations with its nearest neighbors, Canada and Mexico, what else could Trump do? I mean, he's acting like that. And indeed, the evidence is that he was a Russian asset, and that's how he ascended to political office, high office. So I'm not particularly impressed by his saber rattling against Mexico and Canada, and it's been pointed out that America imports a great deal of its oil from Canada and Mexico. If he puts on huge tariffs, as he's done, it's going to crash the American economy. So, you know, what we discovered here in Europe over many, actually centuries of international feuding and fighting and wars, that it's better collaborate with your neighbours and to have trade agreements and to live in peace. He seems to be a throwback to some, you know, pre-Enlightenment kind of mentality in which might makes right and truth is whatever the leader says it is. No, this is pre-Enlightenment stuff. Trump, you know, I'm not impressed. Yeah, and I've been involved as usual with my local library. I'm now helping run the local library in our village. I do think books and libraries are very important. I don't like the way the Tories cut libraries in the UK. We should be funding and sponsoring educational institutions. That's really important. And I've been working on the Love Journal with the help of my Finnish colleague, Mari, who's come here. You know, it should be out by the summer, I think, this important. The unique and only love journal in the world, the only academic love journal, should be out by the end of the summer term, I hope. So that's all good news, I think. Yeah, I mean, other things might come up, but I think I'll stop there for now. I'm also involved with the Delphic Academy. We have a meeting coming up on the 6th of the month, focused particularly on the tragedy of Los Angeles. We have people taking part from America, and you know, the climate change is a real problem. We have huge instability and uncertainty in climate now because Los Angeles has bid and won to host the Olympic Games in 2028. But as a deal, they have to guarantee the safety of the athletes who will come from all over the world, as Paris did when we held them last year. So what happens if there's another set of fires like just happened in Los Angeles? You know, so the Olympic authorities will have to weigh all this up really carefully. You know, it's a huge risk, really, if they go ahead with them. They might relocate to another city in the States, but what I think I'm saying on the behalf of the Delphic Academy is that we should do something. The International Delphic Academy can organise events to do with using the arts for peace, creativity, and envisioning a future world of harmony and peace. And that, I think, is where art comes in. That's its mission. That's why I'm a poet and a musician. The other thing to say, I've also been involved with the World Peace Gardens Network. We have a meeting coming up on the 4th of the month. We meet every other month now. And I do believe that, as Voltaire said, we should cultivate our own gardens. The garden is a symbol of harmony and peace, and in the biblical tradition, we've fallen from the garden. I mean, what that state of mind represented was a certain innocence and capacity to love purely in nature that we want to recover, I think. So the World Peace Gardens Network is also something I'm maintaining after the death of my dear friend Geoffrey Gale, sadly, the architect. And the ceasefire over Gaza and Israel seems to be holding at the moment, touch wood. Nobody's, in my circles, have yet seen the actual text, which raises the problem of, well, what if Israel suddenly says you've broken the agreement and nobody actually knows what the agreement is? I think there should be a neutral third party that was to monitor the implementation of the ceasefire and then to report back if there are breakages on either side. That would be a fair and a just way of dealing with this. I'm also still involved, as people know, with the Lex Innocentium project in Ireland, and the idea of preserving non-combatants in times of war is more important now than ever, especially in an era of such massive weapons. We've seen a flagrant breach of international law in the mass killing of innocents in the Gaza onslaught, and also in the onslaught by Hamas when they broke out and did the same to Israel. But two wrongs don't make a right, as my mother said, and we need a more mature and intelligent way of dealing with this, and the same with the Ukraine-Russia situation. So, and the World Intellectual Wisdom Forum, we're going to be meeting at the end of February, carrying on with that mission to try and get the peace thinkers of the planet to come together. And lastly, I want to say, as a member of the Lib Dems, I'm active in the French National Group. I'm on their committee. We have a roundtable on the 12th of February dealing with the rise of populist right-wing neo-fascism and what's caused it all. And I've written a paper about that, which I'm happy to share with people. It's done. I did a lot of primary research on this, and this is an old problem. I thought it had ended in 1990 when the Peace Treaty of Paris was signed and we ended the Cold War in Europe, but Putin never accepted that. He's been secretly fighting back behind the scenes, using the intelligence apparatus of the Russian state to do that, which is an absolute tragedy. So, what do we do? What response should we have? Should X be banned from Europe, from the UK? Should there be a Royal Commission inquiry into the intelligence failures that led to Brexit? I think the answer is yes on both counts. And I know the Lib Dems are keen, as I am, to see Britain re-establish positive working relationships with the European Union as soon as possible, instead of all this diabolical hate speech that was directed against Europe by forces that had no interest in Britain's actual long-term well-being. So, there should be a Royal Commission inquiry into this, undoubtedly. Okay, that's enough of a roundup of what I've been up to. This is not the news you hear on the mainstream news. This is the Philosophy Club and Baytet news. Right, any comments or observations you'd like to add?
No.
You're okay on that?
No insight.
For now. Okay. Right, so let's move then to the periodic table, as we normally do. And let us let's see what we come up with. I'm going to do mine totally randomly. See what I get. Okay. What have you got?
I choose Primal shamanism.
Okay. Right. Let me go get the textbook that goes with the table. It's useful. I can find it. There it is. Okay, so job done. I found the periodic table book, but also the 99 Names of Peace, which we're also going to look at in a minute. Well, so the Primal shamanism one, number one, we'll do first. I've always thought of the periodic table following the Mendeleev chemical table of the elements. In a sense, this is the hydrogen of spirituality, because all religions grow out of this primal shamanic heritage. And if you study ancient pagan religions, all roads lead to shamanism. And we can safely say that was the primal religion of all mankind. It was an oral tradition. It it evolved as mankind began speech. Dates for that are always being shifted by anthropologists, but I've gone with the hypothesis that it's the invention of fire that gave birth to the rise of speech. And they found traces of fire from about 200,000 BC. I think our ancestors were already using fire for heating their lives in caves and other dwellings from a very early time, 200,000 years ago. And, and speech would have grown out of the ability we had then to stay up and talk around the fire, instead of just immediately going to sleep. and speech grew up, the storytelling, what had you done today, just like I've done. I've told you what I've done this week. This, I think, is a very ancient custom. And the elders of the tribe, the community, would have the most stories, so they would share what they could with the young ones. Those became formalized in ritual initiations over the millennia. And we know that this is the basic structure that all of our primal ancestors followed. The spiritual cosmology is very rich, and anthropologists who went out and studied shamanic cultures in the 19th century in Siberia and Central Asia and in other parts of the world, these people are the workers with the spirit world, and they are healers, they're teachers, they're the elders who guide the community. I think the most important single book on shamanism remains Mircea Eliade's great text, Shamanism, which is a very comprehensive study. And in my course I taught on enlightenments with Satyen Raja. We had a whole session on shamanic work. These cultures also use psychedelics as part of the initiation process. So in different cultures it's different. It's magic mushrooms, or it's ayahuasca, or it's different types of psychedelics. But the point is that it was a communal experience, and it led to altered states of consciousness, which were like a group enlightenment, if you want. And we know, so the traditions of more modern primal religions, they all descend from this. One of the most exciting things religious scholars do is we trace how the written texts of the Bible, or the Vedas, or the holy books, the Quran, of all traditions, actually go back to the earlier shamanic traditions. And that's what I've done in my commentaries. So for instance, in the Bible, I think it's pretty obvious that Jacob was what we would call a shaman, the founder of the tribe of Israel. And what he has in the biblical tradition is a shamanic encounter with a spirit being. In the Bible it says, an angel of the Lord who wrestles with him till break of day. That's an extraordinary text. How often do you wrestle with an angel? Well, shamans wrestle with angels quite a lot, because they're engaging with spirit beings who, who will have their own mixed views on what should be happening on this plane of being. And Jacob was wrestling with them, and he succeeded, and he was renamed Israel. Now that puts shamanism right at the heart of the biblical narrative. I would say that the prophets who come after that are themselves in that shamanic lineage, and I have books by religious studies scholars that kind of go into all this. And what we call the Kabbalah, which is the Tree of Life metaphysical understanding underpinning Judaism that explains the interconnections of the stages and realms of reality is nothing but a shamanic map of the tree of existence. The shamans work with the world axis, and that is the tree of life, which connects the heaven world with the mundane and the subterranean worlds. So we have in the Kabbalah a direct descendant of the ancient shamanic traditions. And we also have that in the Norse traditions, in the tree of Yggdrasil, which is the cosmic tree that everything is part of. We live in Midgard, which is in the middle of the tree. The elves and other spiritual beings live in the upper parts of the tree, and then the dwarves and so on live in the lower parts of the tree. That was the cosmology of the Norse cultures. And it's interesting, it's a Swedish cosmologist, Hannes Alfvén, who's tried to map the actual cosmos and pointed out that it's all interconnected through sort of plasmic radial manifestations. It's not, there aren't separate islands or solar systems or galaxies, they're all interconnected in some way that science doesn't fully understand yet. Now that's the shamanic worldview. They knew this interconnectedness. That's why they use song and speech, magical speech, what we call spells, to sort of send messages across the grid lines of the cosmos. And they worked as healers because often if people present with illness, there's some kind of spiritual root cause of it. And if you want to heal somebody, you don't just give them an aspirin and deal with that, although that might be helpful. Get to the root cause of it, the metaphysics of it. That's what Jung was trying to do, and the whole deep psychology tradition that I've wedded to my understanding of history, because to me history is like a diagnosis, but we have to get to the archetypal struggles going on. When Jung travelled around, to Africa and North America, he was meeting shamans, and they totally got where he was coming from, and vice versa. And the attention to dreams is another thing that shamanism, is very good on, because they are messages, as it were, from the transcendental. And so those traditions, they live on in the Greek mysteries. What I love about Greek religion, if you study it properly and go back to the Bronze Age, go back to Homer and before, is that you come back to the shamanic ancient roots of it. And the goddess is really, really important there. So Athena, Hera, Aphrodite, Artemis, these are great goddesses that come right back from the Bronze Age and the Paleolithic, the Stone Age. There are ancestral, collective, archetypal deities. And they live on in every woman, and every man, is a servant of them. That's why when Plato invoked the 9 Muses, he was essentially also a shaman. And I've written a poem about that, Plato and his shamanic work. So that's my take on that. Well, nowadays, how many are there? Well, I don't know. I reckon in my periodic table, if you read it, there's about 350 million people now still following or practicing a shamanic path. But I reckon if you count up in the whole of history, there must be at least 4 billion. Why so few? Because population was very, very sparse for the first kind of 100,000 years of human history. And so the numbers are smaller. But I think that's another reason why people valued each other. And war was very seldom fought by cultures that practice shamanism. That's a waste of precious human lives. I think with urbanization and the invention of technologies of mass killing, war became then something that was practiced, shockingly. The priesthoods, and for instance the ancient Sumerian priests who witnessed this urban development, they came out of earlier shamanic cultures who esteemed human life and eschewed warfare, but there was this sort of logic of mechanization, industrialization, and the scientific passing out of knowledge into separate parts. In shamanism, all of knowledge is an entire, complete wholeness. So the shaman's duty is to be able to master and navigate the totality of knowing. But they would specialise in different things. So, one might be a healer, one might be the storyteller, one might be the geographer who knows, the lie of the land and the trails and stuff. Final etymological comment on that. In Anglo-Saxon, the word leader is someone that can follow the lays, the lines of interconnection, someone that can hunt the truth. And that's the other thing the shaman does, is they are the leader of the tribe who can follow the spiritual, unmanifest roots. So anyway, that's my little attempt to make sense of that. It's fascinating stuff. Any questions or comments?
Well, I'm interested in the character of the shaman or shaman. I'm not sure which one is. I don't think any word has a correct pronunciation anyway. Because I think you just and in what you were portraying, you portrayed the shaman as the leader of the group, which
the pathfinder.
Yeah. A spiritual leader. Yeah, but not not all leaders are shamans, and I think a political leader is different. But what I'm asking is, what you have found in your research about the character of the shaman. Is there some special people that are in some way called to it? Could anyone be a shaman?
Okay, so those are really good questions. Yes, potentially, but I think one of the key things that Eliade found in his studies, and he studied this stuff in huge detail, is that someone that is called to the shaman service, who's experienced some kind of breakthrough, like they've had an ego death, the socially constructed ego that you're born with that says you're going to be a doctor or a lawyer or a successful rabbi or priest or whatever, the socially acceptable persona has to break down, and you have to encounter the naked void of being itself, which is sometimes scary and frightening. A bit like Jacob encountering, God and having to wrestle. It's scary, but only after you've done that and come out alive. I mean, it's like Buddha going into the forest, rejecting his previous identity as a prince and all that stuff, and just wanting to blend in with the nature spirits and receive instruction from the Nagars. Buddha is another typical shaman, as is Christ, who does the same. He rejects formal status and outer power, goes off into the desert, gets initiated, encounters the spirit beings. So the character has to be humility. If you try to gain spiritual knowledge from a place of arrogance, it doesn't work. You can't. It's like trying to hold plutonium. You can't do it. You need the medicine of humility to be able to encounter the living gods. That's what Buddhists call beginner's mind. If you think you're an expert in shamanism, then you haven't been approaching it in the right way. I would humbly suggest, because there's nothing really the shaman can do. It's the spirit world that does it all. The shaman just directs the energies and tries to make a link between the spirit world and the human world. So spiritualist mediums do the same, and that's another outgrowth of shamanism. People that work with spirit guides and so on. That's what shamans do as well. But we're all beginners in this, I would say. So humility is the key thing. And arrogance is the fatal thing to avoid. Does that help? And also, men and women equally can be called to this. I mean, in most primitive, primal cultures, often it's women that play the role of shaman, because they seem to be even more naturally able to contact altered states of consciousness than men, who often become obsessed with their role play, you know. Yes. Good questions. Okay, right. Shall we move on? I'll do the next one.
What did you pick?
I picked philosophy. I called up existentialism, which is very exciting. We haven't had this before, at least for a while. And this is number 149. And when I was growing up in Brighton, in Sussex, in a different era of what looks like a golden age to me now in retrospect, when I discovered existentialism through my reading of Nietzsche and my reading of Sartre and Camus particularly, that's when I decided I wanted to become a philosopher, because I felt these people were the only ones that were telling the truth in its naked form. It felt to me like the religions, like Christianity, Islam, Judaism, etc., were just, yeah, I mean, they all had value, and I'm not denying that. But I felt they were sort of selling a package holiday deal, whereas I wanted to be able to confront the absolute truth. And it felt to me that the path to go on was that of existentialism. So if you'd have asked me when I was 16, 17, 18, what's your philosophy, I would have probably said an existentialist. And I think it's fascinating. And later on, reading Heidegger and his works on being and time, and embarking on my own epic, Being and Knowledge, or Being and Knowing, which is still in the process of being printed, it's finished. I go back to Aristotle. I think Aristotle was the beginner of existentialism, because he said that all metaphysics is about study of being, as being qua being. So, every other field of knowledge looks at a particular thing, like how to make a cat, how to make a rattle, how to make a druid wand. These are all particular skills and techniques. But what is being itself? That these things are all coherent. What are we, human beings? What is being? It's a mystery. And Aristotle, sort of in the metaphysics, tries to invent a method for how we can study being. He says being comes with 10 qualifying, defining perspectives, which he calls the categories. And he says that everything that has being, you can analyze it according to the 10 categories. But before that even, Parmenides, the great pre-Socratic philosopher, had written this amazing poem to the goddess, in which he says that being is one. It's a hymn to unity, Parmenides' great poem. All being is one, that's its final, ultimate quality. And this is why perhaps also in Islam, which reaffirmed the unity of being, you get Mullah Sadra coming along later, the great Islamic philosopher from Persia, who is an existentialist as well, from an Islamic perspective. He says, look, that's the point of Muhammad's revelation, because we were getting too twisted and tied up with the details of variety and difference, and science became a sort of competitive game for measurement and competing against other people, a sort of competitive sport. Whereas truth should be the opposite. It should be spiritual wisdom. It should be about finding the unity. And that is the heart of being. So, I put Nietzsche in his rejection of scholarship. I mean, Nietzsche was a great scholar,